All right, everybody. We are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. It is season 3. You don't know what episode it is. We just continue to record. Continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. Now, remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so you continue to bring on cool guests from all over. Now, today, I'm with another special guest, Coach Tommy Davis. He is a 2-time NCAA track and field champion coach. He works on speed, strength, and personal training. He's also a coach at the B-Tech Acceleration.
BT Acceleration.
BT Acceleration. Coach, thank you and welcome to the Coach's Compass.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. So I think as everybody loves to know is like what got you started in this industry and what made you so passionate about track and field?
Yeah, so growing up, I did all the sports that, every normal kid would do, T-ball, pee-wee football. Quickly learned that I was garbage. I was so bad. And my parents, bless their souls. My mom, I think at one point said, "You might need to find something else to do. Don't think sports are in the cards for you." I took it personally. I started running track in 7th grade. I was the worst kid on the team, and that's just the way it went. I got last place in pretty much everything, but I was hooked. It was a different level of excitement. It was a different thrill, and I wanted more. So, pretty much from that point on, said, "You know what? I'm track all the way. This is my sport. This is what I'm going to do," and decided, hey, I'm just going to focus on this. So ran cross country in the fall. No, knowing what I know now, it was not very good, but it kept me busy. I went to a real small city in Ohio called Clyde. Graduated with about 100 kids in my class. So, think real small town. Friday Night
Real
Lights
small, yeah.
type of small town. Football was everything there. So, just would spend, hang on, hey, stop. Spend a lot of time just hanging out with my buddies, and track was in the spring, and that was pretty much it. So a lot of the other time was spent just what can we do in a small town except go to McDonald's and hang out for a little bit. Hey, stop, go. Oh my gosh. So high school track definitely started off on a pretty good foot for me. Just barely made varsity by the end of my freshman year. From a time standpoint, nothing too crazy. And then sophomore year, things started to change. I started to see some improvements, was able to be respectable at the conference and regional level. For small town USA, the times aren't super impressive, so compared to what you see high schoolers doing now or what you see with kids in Texas, we were pretty small time, but we liked it that way. And had some pretty good improvement and started to think maybe I could do something like this in college. I don't know what level. A junior year came, had a lot more success, couple school records, had a really big breakthrough and just learned how to be an athlete, how to win, and how to have fun. And with that came some college interest, mostly D2, D3. I knew in my head that D1 wasn't an option. I wasn't going to be a 10-2, 10-1 guy, and I was smart enough to know that I know what my gifts are, and I'm not a sub-10 sprinter. So why would I waste my time trying to get the attention of a coach that their job hinges on winning, and I'm not going to help them win. So I was realistic, and didn't really take the search process all that seriously. But I had one school and one coach that was pretty adamant, and they had recruited a previous senior from our school that was an All-American, had a great amount of success, and that was a big part of my recruiting process. Ohio Wesleyan came to be for me in the end, and man, that was the start of something pretty awesome. Developed a really good relationship with my head coach. And by my senior year, I was an exercise science major. They gave me a semester, essentially 2 semesters, to be an apprentice under the staff. So I got to do a lot of just tasky jobs, run social media, help with recruiting, kind of learn the ins and outs of what does it look like to be a collegiate coach. I fell in love with that process. By the time I got to the end of senior year, the question was, what are you going to do next? Told my parents I wouldn't go to school to be a gym teacher, but I'll give you the second best thing. I'll go to school to be a coach. Yeah, they were happy for me, but they were like, weren't you going to be like an engineer or something? That just wasn't in the cards for me. School for me. So met my wife in college. We got married right out of college and then moved out to St. Louis. And, I wish I could say it was a fairy tale ending and everything just worked from that point on. It didn't. So fall of 2019 was when we got out here. I was a volunteer at WashU at the time in St. Louis and pretty much just learning. And they had a great established culture. It was a winning program, Hall of Fame coaches on staff, and I just got to learn and absorb. And then March 2020 came, and it came indeed. And that's when things really changed. So, I was working 2 part-time jobs at the time and was fortunate enough to, have the ability to work through the pandemic. And when you work in retail during the pandemic, you grow some scars. People, you really find out a lot about people. And as much as I just despised the grind every day of working multiple jobs and trying to just make it work to get into coaching, I think it really impacted how I lead today, just my outlook on life and all the little intangibles that I learned. So when COVID hit, the prior full-time assistant that was in charge of recruiting and the sprints group was actually, placed on leave, and we knew she was going to leave regardless, but they furloughed everyone and had essentially said, if you're full-time, you can't work. If you're part-time, you're not furloughed, you can work. So legally, I was allowed to take on a whole heck of a lot of stuff for the program. So I did it for free, and I did a bunch of recruiting. I hop on Zooms and try to get to know the team and start writing programming for people that I knew nothing about really. I only got to work with them for a couple months, and it wasn't pretty in the beginning. It was a very messy process. It was very exhausting, but we made it work. So I did that from March 2020 all the way to February 2021. I got a whole recruiting class, did all the things. We weren't allowed to meet recruits on campus. My first ever recruit, I said, screw the rules. We're going to go grab Mexican food. So we did. I can say that now because I'm not in that world.
You're right.
They can't fire me for that anymore. So we did that. And then February 2021 came. I took the test for the CSCS, passed it by the skin of my teeth because I knew if I wanted to get a job that involved track and sports performance, I needed that. So I passed it and I gave them the paper. I said, hey, I passed it. What else do you need me to do? And they said, hey, we can hire you full-time through the end of the school year. So I did that. Had a pretty good amount of success for those couple months and really just got to finally do something that I enjoyed. That time came and ended. And then I spent about half that summer interviewing for the job formally and then accepted that job in August 2021. 2021. And then held it through September 2024. And then kind of the rest was history. So it was a really good run. We had a national title on the men's side my first full year. And then a couple years later, after many runner-up finishes, the women finally got one my last year, and it was pretty sweet. So, I wore a lot of hats throughout my 5 years there. Main responsibilities were head of track and field recruiting. I would administer the sports performance program, which was, strength conditioning essentially for about 80 to 90 kids a year. So there'd be different time periods where it was just me due to NCAA rules. And so it would be a lot of the teaching, speed mechanics, helping administer workouts. And I would have different subgroups. It wasn't just me having 80 people on a lane. I would kind of separate people based on event groups and figure out who are my dependable people, who are my mini coaches that I trust to carry something out, because I can't be everyone and I can't be everywhere. So, it became a pretty well-oiled system, and it would be about a month out of the year that would happen. And then from a lifting standpoint, we would have 3 to 14 lifts a week after practice. And then I would usually run 3 to 4 sessions in the morning throughout the week. Hours became pretty daunting. You're waking up at 6 and you're setting up a weight room at 7. And you're doing admin work throughout the day, meeting with recruits. You're going to your actual event group practice, and then you're opening up the weight room for the team again. But it was cool, and that I got to work with everyone. I got to know everyone, and I got to have an impact and a pulse beyond just what the hurdles coach would have. And that was cool. When I did decide to leave, it was real sweet to hear just, you don't realize how much impact you have on people. And it wasn't about increasing how much they could lift. It wasn't about PRs, man. It's about investing time in people and people knowing that you care. That makes the difference. And I look back very fondly. It was a cool experience for me, formative for me. Family ultimately came first in the end, and that was a big reason why. Brendan Thompson brought me on to BT Acceleration, and he's a new dad still. I'm a little more experienced now. My son's a year and a half, and so I'm getting a little bit more experience there. But that's kind of when things changed for me, and I had to start to evaluate what are my priorities right now, and what do I see as important for me.
How is it to be out of the college sector though now? Like now you kind of have more free reign to kind of coach. I wouldn't say coach the way you want to coach, but I think you're not so much under these blocks of like recruiting and all this stuff. Now you have people that are searching out to work with you. And again, you get some more free time to, be a dad, be a husband, and all those things. So how's it been to be outside of it?
Yeah, so I've always been blessed to have a lot of autonomy. Even in the collegiate sector, I felt like I could put my stamp on things the way that I wanted to. The number one difference for me has been the specificity has changed so much. When you go from 20 to 25 athletes in your group, I'm not really coaching at that point. I feel like I'm just kind of babysitting. And it doesn't mean that good things didn't happen, but those nuances that I'm able to see, those nuances that I'm able to spend 10 minutes on with 1 to 2 people, all of a sudden you've got 20 people and you can't implement that. And so for me, the difference was that the collegiate sector, self-organization mattered a lot. I needed my kids to take ownership, and I needed them to really understand when I say something, it might mean something for you and it may mean something for someone else. Now, with working with one kid for an hour, you can really dive into the weeds. And it doesn't mean we always do, but the ability to add that personal touch has been fantastic. But from a programming standpoint, I don't think much has changed for me. I've kind of stayed true to what I believe to work really well, and it's been effective. And so it hasn't. So I haven't had to change too much how I program, but I have definitely had to shoot from the hip, as they say, knowing that Johnny is a freshman and he can't move right, and his parents are sending him to this trainer and that trainer, this club practice, this team practice. That's a challenge. And normally I would be someone that's, I would say, moderately aggressive in training, and that I want to take chances. I want to see what someone's limits are. Maybe I have to pull the reins back a little more. And now the focus has gone from how far can we go to how smart can we be. And that's not a hard shift for me because I've had athletes like that in the past. However, I think the game has changed in that kids are doing everything. And it's not enough to know the program. It's not enough to just be an X's and O's guy. You got to really understand the psyche of these kids and the parents, and that they're probably pretty type A, and they probably want everything, and they're going to try to do everything to make it happen. And a lot of times you just got to give them what's effective and simple. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple, but even at the collegiate level, at the private sector level, people are people. Training is training, and it'll never stray away from the psychology and the human element. As much as we think ChatGPT and Grok and all these AI systems are going to allow us to write training. Like I saw a post today on Twitter, a coach I follow, he said to Grok, which is like the AI on Twitter, he said, write me a training program similar to Charlie Francis. And it actually spit out something really good. And I'm like, that's scary, because anyone can just say, insert popular name here, write training just like this so I can do it. And it might work, but I think people forget that there's an art to this thing, and the great ones can figure out that art. And you might have moderate success for a year or 2 years by just blindly following. But if you actually want to make a name for yourself and do something, you got to have your own stamp too. And I think that's what's missing right now. Not a lot of people know that.
Yeah. I mean, that's really scary to have that be out there and be able to people just put it in the AI. But also there's I
Hmm.
mean, that's great, awesome. But there's also the coach's eye, right? The stuff that we know that we see on a daily basis or we've seen that kind of implement into our athletes as you're doing when you're programming. Like you're seeing on that day that, hey, that piece of that program might not work that day. So we got to take that out, cut it out. Let's work on this other little detail. So, I mean, great AI is there. Awesome for the guys that are just trying to make it by and earn a little quick dollar. But for the ones like
Yeah.
you guys that are doing it the correct way and also want to see athletes achieve higher levels, you know that AI will only last so long. But what have you seen in the speed training over the years that has kind of changed for the better, or like equipment that you've seen that's come in and kind of helped you guys become better at your training and programming?
Yeah, from an equipment standpoint, yeah, I actually am a unicorn in that I didn't have the privilege to have much.
Just let me know, stop watching.
Even being at a good school that we had a pretty good budget. I just chose not to implement it. And I think a lot of it was that, you know, it's cumbersome for me with 20 plus kids. And then it became an issue of like, well, if you're going to give it to 20, you got to give it to 100. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. So I'm going to trust my coaching eye and what are the sounds that I hear? What are the shapes that I see? However, I think it does help from hey, is this person prepared to train? If we're tracking the data, what are we using it for? If it's to prove to someone that they can do something, that's great. But I think we're missing the point because athletes have known that they can do things prior to knowing what the miles per hour were. To me, that's not really helpful. If it's used as a teaching tool, I think it's pretty effective. So, if I've got someone that's running 19 miles an hour and they think they're fast, I would tell them, well, what if your average play moves at 17 miles per hour? You're working pretty close to your max speed. You need to get faster. Um, for me, I don't have a ton of, I wish I had more anecdotes to say like, yeah, this is how equipment has helped me and timing and all this stuff and technology. I really don't. The most that I've ever used is my stopwatch and maybe the bullet belt a few times just to prove a point. But, on the other side of things, from a speed training lens, man, I think everyone thinks they know everything. I am not a rage baiter. Let me just say that up front. I think a lot has changed. There's pre-COVID training and then there's post-COVID training and knowledge. And I love social media in the sense that we have an opportunity to positively improve strength conditioning, speed training, and just coaching in general. I think there's a lot of good stuff that people are putting out there. But I think it gets dangerous when we start speaking kind of in these absolutes of you have to do this to improve. You have to do that to improve. Fortunately, I think a lot of the times the answer is usually, well, it depends. And people don't like to hear that. When I tell an athlete it depends, they kind of give me this cross-eyed look like, well, is it this or this? And I'm like, I can't give you a straight answer here because, a lot of times if I say yes to this, you're going to do it and then it's not going to work and you're going to think I'm full of shit. When in reality, it just depends, right? Every kid's different. Every team is different. But I think if you stray too far from the fundamentals, you're kind of done. So, what I see today is everyone's got the right idea in that you got to sprint. There's no doubt about that. What I would question is the idea of only sprinting. I think that has been taken a little too far to the extreme. I think we have to be mindful and respectful of, kind of different modalities. And I go back to the idea that it's called strength and conditioning. There is a purpose there. There's a reason for that. I think, when it comes to the strength piece of things, there's a lot of debates of trap bar, Olympic lifts, multi throws, all those things. I think they're all tools. And depending on where you're coaching, how much time do you have? What experience level do you have as the coach to implement them? You make those decisions based on what your client base or team or whoever you're serving, you implement what's going to work best for them. I know coaches that only Olympic lift and they will swear up and down by it and they have a lot of success. I know coaches that will never touch the Olympic lifts because they know it's not worth the time for them. Good for you. I'm not so pragmatic that it has to be one way. My only negotiable is you better care and listen and have empathy. Otherwise, you're not going to make it in this field. You might make a buck or two, but I think true sustained success, it has to be rooted in care, has to be rooted in putting people first. And I carried that as a coach. I carry that as a private practitioner now. It's just a principle for me that is important.
I love it because we had another guest on before, Coach Padula out of Oklahoma, who works with the softball team over there, who said pretty much same thing, that it's athlete 24/7, right? Like it's all about the athlete first. Like yes, we get into this coaching business because we want to, help others, and we also believe that what we're doing is correct, but it's always about the athlete, right? So if you're not doing what you think like cares about for them, or asking them how they're feeling, like how is your program ever going to be successful? On top of that, what do you prefer? For you, is it harder to work with a guy that already comes in polished and super fast, or would you rather get an athlete that is coming in super raw, maybe has a little bit of good mechanics, just hasn't touched their full potential? Which one would you prefer to work with?
I think I like a good challenge. I never want to diminish that it's easier to work with someone that's polished. Sometimes when the job's already kind of been done for you, that's fun, right? I've had plenty of college athletes that came in polished, and it was like, man, you're really self-aware. You're really smart. You know how to kind of coach yourself to an extent. That's rewarding. I'm not going to say that it's not. I love being able to do that. However, I think there is something innocent about a young athlete that's raw with an okay base in mechanics, but doesn't know a lot. And I think there's some freedom in not knowing too much. And when you work with kids that are very type A, and a lot of the client base currently is a lot of private high schools in St. Louis, pretty high dollar schools. And so with that comes a lot of type A kids. They want to know everything, and they want to turn their brains on and figure out how to do it. And the same thing at WashU is a lot of really smart kids. And usually the problem wasn't that they were training too hard, or that, we were programming something that was just backwards. A lot of it was just, I'm trying to make a change, can't because I'm stuck, I'm thinking too much. And when you take the athlete's mind out of the way, I think you shed a lot of that. So I like both. I would probably take the raw athlete almost every time, but I've had both, and they're both awesome to work with.
Is there ever a day that you kind of question or just have this feeling of imposter syndrome, where you're kind of like, hey, was that workout the correct workout, or that exercise I put in there for that athlete, was that the right thing for today? Is there ever that feeling?
Man, too many times. I think every coach has probably experienced that. I don't care if you're Nick Saban, if you're Tom Brady, every person experiences that. For me, that was very heavy early in my coaching career when I felt like I had to prove myself. There was a lot of intimidation of like, man, my head coach has won multiple national titles. The other assistant coach is a Missouri Hall of Famer. And then the third one is a Missouri Hall of Famer. I'm like, man, I got to show these guys that I'm worth something. So yeah, there was some imposter syndrome, but I also used it in a positive way to fuel me of like, no, like I am who I am. I'm going to stay true to me. I'm not this person. I'm not that person. I'm me. And the athletes can sense that, and it doesn't change based on I'm wearing this team's jersey versus now I'm an independent person. I'm going to continue to be me. And I think that has lessened throughout the years. I think my confidence as someone that can prescribe something is very high at this stage. There's not a lot of time spent for me kind of ruminating on what can I do better, ruminating on should I do A or should I do B? A lot of it now is bigger picture. I'm not looking at the micro, I'm looking at the macro. And how does this affect the broad system and the broad athlete? And number one, it's way less mental fatigue. And number two, I've kind of learned that it's not about the micro as much. It's, what can be done consistently well over time that elicits a positive change. And that might look the same for a lot of people, but for my current age groups, that's going to look a little different from person to person. So a lot of it now is spending energy on just people and getting to know them and what kind of understanding what makes them tick, what are they responding well to. So psychology is a big part of me trying to become a better coach right now, reading body language, kind of seeing responses to things that are hard. When we try to make changes, is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? And for me, it's stacking positive things through training every single time as much as I can, but also being able to communicate when things aren't going well. Hey, this is a normal part of the process. It's not just linear, right? There's increase, there's some decrease. When you train harder for longer, your body just kind of goes down. If you rest correctly, it should go back up. And just teaching kids in a language that they understand. I think I've become much better at that. So sorry to some of my early groups in my career of maybe not being as good at that, but I think there's been some wisdom that's kind of accrued for me over the past couple of years now.
I tell the same thing to a lot of my athletes that from my earlier years. Hey, once I became a dad and I understood to listen to my child a little bit more, because I also have a 3-year-old daughter, and dealing with that is one of those things where you got to learn to listen and learn to kind of hear what they're saying and then work from there. So I get what you're saying when it says about just listening to them a little bit more. What is something you'd like us to ask our next guest?
That's a good question. I knew you were going to ask that question because I listened to Brendan's podcast. Yeah, a question that I would ask the next person. If there was one thing that you could tell your younger self, what would it be?
And what would it be for you?
For me, I think it would be stop comparing yourself to others. Trust your gut. Trust your instincts. I swear that my instincts have never failed me. I spent so much time early in my career, like, gosh, I can even look back at some old text messages with colleagues of like, did I really ruminate that long over this small little training thing? And in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really matter. I just had to move on and accept what was going to happen. So for me, being able to tell my younger self, like, just move on. You're good. You know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. Don't overthink it. I think that would save me a lot of mental fatigue, no doubt.
Heck yeah. Coach, thank you so much, and I appreciate you jumping on today. Man, everything kept real. I love your journey. Love what you guys are doing. Keep on the good work and trust in that gut, man. You're doing great things.
All right, man. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. We're out.